Story 1. I worked in fast food in my early 20s and met a man who had killed another man who was sexually assaulting children in the complex where he lived. He had just come out of prison when I met him at work. He was a very likable person, honestly. Story 2. I had a woman decide my truck was her preferred method for not living. Totally affects you. After over 30 years, I still have nightmares. I experience small panic attacks when I see someone walking in the street or even close to the curb. Story 3. The toddler was second degree, not first degree. I think he was out on bond in 1999, with only a couple of months difference. He was found not guilty in 1999. He was released from prison in 2019 after serving his full sentence. I knew a guy in high school who, at around 32, killed his girlfriend's toddler for crying too much. He kicked the child so hard in the chest and stomach that the organs exploded. In high school, he was difficult to deal with. Apparently, he became even worse later on. In 1998, he was involved in a homicide. I think this was the toddler case. And in 1999, he faced felony murder charges. I just looked him up and found he was charged in 2024 for second-degree arson and breaking and entering as a habitual offender. Story 4. My neighbor shot his father. He is usually a calm person. I have never seen him get angry, even when his wife frequently shouts and argues with him. In the days leading up to the incident, he seemed unwell, talking to himself as if someone were threatening his life. During the police investigation, it was revealed that he was suffering from schizophrenia and had not taken his medication for 3 months. Story 5. My uncle killed his cousin as a teenager in a drunk driving-related accident. He was the drunk driver, and his cousin was a passenger. He later joined the armed forces and was deployed to several countries, including Cyprus, Haiti, and Afghanistan. But the most challenging experience was in Bosnia in the 1990s. Before going to Bosnia, he was a quiet, reserved man who was quick to anger and tended to drink excessively, yet he was still an otherwise decent person. He always had a look in his eyes suggesting he carried some emotional baggage, but he remained somewhat personable. After returning from Bosnia, he was a shell of his former self, becoming a recluse with significant difficulty reintegrating into society. He still lives a hermit lifestyle in the woods, surviving off the money he makes by selling handcrafted knives that he forges in his garage. He almost never speaks to anyone, does not attend family events, has never remarried or dated after divorcing my aunt, and maintains contact only with a very few friends who have chosen to stand by him. My stepfather is one of those friends, and he receives an occasional random call, almost exclusively in the middle of the night, from my uncle, who rarely says much. It's as if he calls wanting to express something, but the words never come. It's clear he witnessed or experienced traumatic events in Bosnia, compounded by heavy feelings stemming from the incident involving his cousin. Story 6. I live in Ukraine, where nearly every man has killed someone due to the ongoing war. It is difficult to describe, but those who have experienced it are never the same. There is a heaviness in their eyes, as if something inside them has been broken or changed forever. They carry this burden with them, even if they attempt to conceal it. One can never truly be the same after such an experience. Story 7. One of my regular customers killed his wife. I saw him daily for years, even after he became a suspect. He was an odd guy, almost overly friendly, and remembered things you told him. He always ordered a 6-shot Americano before work, was a bit nerdy, tipped generously, and brought us gifts at Christmas. However, he always had a strange vibe. I was not surprised at all when we learned what he had done, and he brutally murdered her as well. Story 8. My uncle by marriage killed someone in Iraq, but I'm too young to know if he was always a disturbed individual or if he changed afterward. He is currently in prison for the assault of a minor, and throughout the time I have known him, he would come home from work after being discharged and then go hide in his shed, which he renovated into a workspace. In summary, he is a troubled person. Story 9. I spent 4 years in an assisted living facility, waiting for Social Security disability. One of the residents was a pleasant older man who had served time for manslaughter in his youth. He acknowledged this fact and mentioned it occasionally, but I never asked him more about it. He was a nice man, at least during the time I knew him, and I figured he had done his time and that was enough. Story 10. A friend of mine killed the man who assaulted his sister, apparently with his father's help. He told me about it one day while he was drunk. I didn't believe him at first, but he definitely seemed troubled by the situation. Aside from that, he was a good person, friendly and outgoing. Story 11. One of my mother's boyfriends was a very bad person. He associated with a group of individuals, many of whom had committed murder at some point. Some served time in prison while others did not. My mother's boyfriend did serve prison time throughout his life, but not for murder. I later heard from someone in his family that he had set a house on fire with a person inside who was a target of the group he associated with, and I believe that. I remember him getting a teardrop tattoo between when I first met him and the next time I saw him years later. He was a horrible individual. He was extremely abusive and beat my mother so severely the last time they were together that every bone in her face was broken, causing enough head trauma to result in a traumatic brain injury and multiple fractures in other areas of her body, including her spine. I recall that when I was a child, he would pull wings off flies or catch horseflies and thread a string through them so I could have them on a leash. He also once put our cat in a pillowcase and swung it around his head until the cat was yowling while he was babysitting me. I remember being horrified, and he told me to laugh. It's funny. So I did just to make him stop. He was very strange and had serious mental issues, yet he always seemed to have this complex about wanting to improve himself. He claimed to feel regret for his actions, but he lacked the genuine ability to change who he was, which was psychopathic. Story 12. A guy I met a few years ago was involved in a drug deal gone wrong. The other person pulled a gun on him, pistol whipped him in the head, and before he could fire a shot, the guy I know somehow pulled out a knife and slashed right through the attacker's jugular vein. He bled out very quickly. The guy I know was charged with manslaughter in self-defense and a few other charges related to drugs. He spent 9 years in prison and was released early for good behavior. He comes off as a decent person, but you can see a level of sorrow and heaviness in his eyes. He is usually very calm and does not get mad about much. I think prison really humbled him. He is now a phenomenal tattoo artist. He is not the first person I have met who went to prison for some time and came out very calm and low-key. Story 13. I don't know him personally, but he is a member of my mom's family. She said he was nice and respectful and only killed in self-defense. Story 14. I didn't know he was a killer when I interacted with him. I was at a party, and this person kept trying to act tough, being pushy and talking trash. When I'm around people like that, I just stare at them because they clearly want attention. He looked at me and said, "What are you looking at?" I replied, "You. You're the one making a scene." He stared at me with his tough guy expression for the rest of the night. Later, I was told, "No, you don't want to mess with him." 3 days later, he stabbed and killed a young man. It was his second murder. I found out later that he had also killed his stepfather. His parents have connections in law enforcement, so he got away with that one. I'm not sure if he served time for killing that young man, which happened in Silver Springs. Story 15. I grew up in Basra, Iraq. I had many classmates who grew up to join the Republican Guard and militant groups. Everyone at a young age in Iraq in the 1990s was heavily influenced by Sharia law. I knew many people who became martyrs. They believed it was for a good cause. I witnessed a lot of negative experiences growing up, but that is the reality of what Sharia law can do to young people. Story 16. My dad was friends with a formerly homeless woman who said she had stabbed a man to death who attempted to rape her over 20 years ago. I'm not sure if it was true, but one night I was at his place with my father, a man named Mark, and her. We went to a bar, but my dad and she left Mark because he started using cocaine, and my dad didn't want to be around it. Mark walked back to my dad's house and attacked him while he was getting out of the shower. This woman woke me up yelling, "I stabbed him." I walked into my dad's room and saw her holding a paring knife covered in blood. The man was still attacking my father, so I wrestled him off and called the police. I don't really doubt she killed someone after that. Story 17. A friend of mine was attacked by a jealous ex-boyfriend of his girlfriend with a baseball bat that had nails attached. He managed to wrestle the bat away and hit the attacker back. The attacker went into a coma and died a few months later. My friend received a 6-month jail sentence. However, he is a laid-back family man, hardworking and stays out of trouble. Story 18. I have a friend who killed many people during military service. He rarely speaks about it directly, but on a few occasions when alcohol was involved, he shared some details. He seems haunted by his experiences and is categorized as disabled by the Veterans Affairs despite no visible physical injuries. My brother also has similar experiences, though at a much greater distance. He is a military pilot and has never discussed any mental impact from knowing he has been responsible for many deaths. We grew up in a faith that taught us that difficult topics should not be addressed, which likely means his mental health has been affected significantly. Story 19. My friend in high school killed his abusive father as soon as he grew strong enough. He was a relaxed person, not very intelligent, but a decent guy to spend time with. We lost contact because we didn't have much to discuss after he was released from prison. Story 20. I went through school with a girl we will call Kay. Kay was loud and very opinionated. Usually, when she walked into a room, you knew it. However, for the most part, Kay was a sweet girl who never really meant any harm. Occasionally, I would chat with Kay, but we were never really close. Kay started dating a guy we will call Jay during freshman year. Jay was known to use hard drugs and hung around other kids who did the same in school. At some point between high school and graduation, Kay began using hard drugs. Jay and Kay had a son and eventually got a divorce. He now has sole custody of their son. Last year, Kay and 2 men entered a man's house, robbing, beating, and stabbing him to death. During the murder, Kay was seen running out of the house with her hands over her ears and visibly upset, but she called no one and did nothing to intervene. Kay turned herself in and was found guilty yesterday. She could face up to 60 years in prison. According to an article I read, Kay showed no remorse for what she has done. It's hard for me to believe the outgoing, bubbly girl who once cried because of thunder outside during her senior year of high school helped brutally kill a man. Drugs have destroyed this girl's life in such a short time. This is not the same girl I went to high school with. If she receives the maximum sentence, Kay won't be released until she is 88 years old. Story 21. The person I know is a terrifying monster. He is helpful and nice in public as long as you do what he says. The second you don't, you better have a good hiding spot. Behind closed doors, he is a narcissistic, emotionally immature individual who takes out his feelings on others in the form of rage. Story 22. He was one of my professors in policing college. An ex-SWAT officer, he carried the 2 bullets from his experiences and passed them around the class, proud as ever. Story 23. I had an aunt, my mother's aunt, who was responsible for the death of one of her sons. He had a chronic illness, and she refused to help, stating that if it was God's will for him to live, he would. No medical intervention of any kind was used for the child. Her husband did what he could to step in, but he couldn't quite get past her irrational behavior. He left her shortly before their son died, took the child with him, and tried to get help, but it had been too late. From what I've been told, the child only lived for a couple more months after escaping. She exhibited extreme behavior but seemed normal in every other way. She had a job, owned a house, kept it clean, and appeared normal, but her actions were what was truly unsettling. I feared for my life every time my mother would leave my brother and me with her. We would typically be with her for a couple of days, at most 2 weeks. She even looked unstable. Story 24. Where I grew up, it was an unspoken but common rule to avoid walking around downtown at night, especially alone. Someone in high school did this on purpose to get the chance to harm someone in self-defense. This happened twice. He was nice but always gave off a strange vibe, even claiming to be a psychopath. Maybe we should have listened to him, but the guy loved animals, so I didn't believe it until the incident occurred. Story 25. I knew someone in primary school who ended up committing murder. As a child, he seemed relatively normal, perhaps slightly more aggressive than other kids, but still normal. I just assumed it was due to anger management issues. I cannot imagine that child I knew killing someone as brutally as he did. I believe that many murderers, like the boy I knew, are shaped by negative influences during their teenage years. He was only about 16 or 17 when it happened. Story 26. He lived in Vancouver and was a fraternity member in college. He was convicted of domestic violence and child abuse, which led to his expulsion from the fraternity during the summer between his senior year and his first year of medical school. He completed several internships and worked at the same part-time job for 11 years throughout undergraduate studies, medical school, and residency. He got married towards the end of medical school. During his residency, he settled a civil lawsuit for medical malpractice that resulted in a pediatric patient's death. After residency, he killed his wife. Story 27. It is really hard to describe. They seemed pleasant, but there was always something slightly off. I couldn't put my finger on it until after the fact, and I never assumed that was the reason for the discomfort. Story 28. My granddad caused an accident in the 1970s that resulted in a death. To me, he was always my granddad, but my dad, uncles, aunts, and Nan said that day changed him, leaving a sadness inside him that he couldn't let go of. They said he was never the same person afterward. If this is not the type of response you were looking for, I apologize. Story 29. I know a few people who killed someone during military service and they often struggle with it, but it's not debilitating for them. I knew one person who killed a man while interrupting an attempted break-in at his workshop. When the man charged at him, he felt the need to use lethal force. He required counseling, although the family members of the man he shot forgave him, stating that if he hadn't shot the man, he would have likely tried to kill him. He still had a difficult time coping with the experience. There were no murders in the common sense of the term, to my knowledge. Story 30. A kid I grew up with murdered a guy he hung out with. They were drinking heavily, and this guy joked about sleeping with my friend's mother. He waited until the guy was incoherent, filled the tub, and drowned him. Then he dug a shallow grave, tossed him in, and left. Someone found him. The police used a tattoo to gather initial information, which led to the kid I knew. I wouldn't have thought he'd be a killer, but I also wasn't having sex with his mother. Story 31. I am a professor, and for a brief period, I had a few combat veterans of the global war on terror in my classes who were using their GI Bill to get through school. A few had killed people. One in particular had significant combat experience and had taken a number of lives. He was actually quite a normal guy, just an older, non-traditional student except with a distinctive beard. He was not someone you would easily identify as a combat veteran in a bar. One thing he mentioned that seemed to linger with him was the look of fear on people's faces when he entered their homes looking for weapons or individuals. Making people afraid appeared to leave him with deep sadness and regret. My cousin used to be a police officer, and he killed someone while on duty. A suspect drove a car at him with the intent to run him down, and my cousin shot and killed the driver. I do not know many details about the incident, but he left the force shortly afterward. I think it was hard on him, even though he was technically defending himself. He teaches high school now. My high school drama teacher served in Vietnam, and he used to show intense slides of his 2 tours at the end of the semester. I believe it was his way of being anti-war, scaring us away from glamorizing conflict. Based on what we were looking at, I am pretty sure he had taken lives as well. Now that I think about it, I know quite a few people who have taken the lives of others. Story 32. Larry ran the gym in town that my parents went to. When I was in high school, I went as well. Larry was unsettling in the sense that he constantly hit on women, touched them, and leered at them at his gym. He was pleasant enough, but I had been warned by pretty much everyone not to be alone with him. He shot his wife in the face with a shotgun, then turned the weapon on himself. She survived. There was another incident involving my friend's dad from the same gym. He always acted like a big shot, making grunting noises and throwing weights down. Once, while attempting to deadlift far above his ability, he ripped his pants. It was as if his world had ended. He grabbed my friend and ran, not returning for several weeks. He became visibly angry if the incident was mentioned. He later killed his wife that summer and tried to hide it by driving his truck into a swamp. Honestly, in both cases, when I found out, I was not really surprised. Story 33. I know someone who was a train engineer. He killed 8 people over a 25-year career and knew all their names because he had to testify that he did everything he could to stop the train. Story 34. He was a narcissistic sociopath. I didn't know that was a thing when I knew him as a child, but that is what he was. I wasn't surprised to hear he had been convicted of murder because I always sensed that he could seriously hurt someone for very little reason without feeling anything about it. I had that sense from when he was about 7. I also knew a man who got together with my grandmother when they were both widowed in their 70s. He had served in World War II and had taken lives. He was one of the loveliest men I ever met. But obviously, the circumstances were very different. Story 35. I knew a man who later went to jail for stabbing his landlord. When I knew him, he was the boyfriend of a friend. It was shocking to find out he had killed someone. He was a talented musician with a lot of potential, but he had a loser mentality. Things always seemed to go wrong and stressed him out. The most memorable thing I heard him say was, "Claire, where are my socks?" before they were both going out to perform. It sounded so helpless and demanding. My partner and I used to imitate his pleading tone for years after he disappeared from the scene. Story 36. A man lived in the same apartment building. He was a quiet, nerdy type and never spoke to anyone. We would see him in the lobby or elevator without exchanging a word. One night, I came home to a strong police presence throughout the building. He had shot someone who attempted to break into his apartment. It was considered self-defense. Handguns are very hard to obtain in our country, but he was not charged for having one. Story 37. My tenant murdered the mother of his child, who was also my other tenant. He struggled with schizophrenia but was always nice and mild-mannered. I could tell his cognition was different from others, but I never could have predicted him being capable of what he did. He stabbed her multiple times and brought her body outside. They had a 4-month-old baby, whom he also brought outside to lay with her. The baby was left outside with her for 36 hours before a welfare check was called in. The baby was unharmed and survived those hours outside. Story 38. A friend of mine used to be a police officer, and he had to kill someone in the line of duty. It was a justified shooting, as the suspect had a knife and lunged at him. The shooting was investigated, and there were no charges as a result. It was difficult for him, and he went through counseling. He eventually became a minister. Overall, he is a decent person, perhaps a bit having an attitude at times, but nothing excessive. I don't think he was suited to be a police officer, so it worked out well in the end that he left the profession. Story 39. My childhood friend killed someone in self-defense a few years ago. He is a kind, compassionate person whose life was genuinely in danger and who would never hurt anyone under normal circumstances. A man attacked him with a crowbar, my friend stabbed him, and the man died. He was tried for second-degree murder and acquitted. Things are going well for him now, but I know it will haunt him forever. Story 40. My grandfather killed 7 people. He was a locomotive engineer and committed suicide. He was the nicest and most humble person. It didn't seem to bother him much either. Story 41. He was an exceptional liar who made people feel sorry for him. He made you feel as if he only had eyes for you and made you truly believe him when he said he was sorry. He would get angry and punch my legs as a joke, leaving large bruises. He once accidentally burned me with a hot pan by pressing it against my arm. He killed my baby rabbit and sexually assaulted me. Story 42. She appeared to want to be relaxed. Her entire persona seemed to be directed toward portraying what a serial killer does in movies. She was rather uninteresting. Story 43. A cousin's husband is a former police officer who was fired after killing a minor during a police raid. The man shot at the vehicle, and the commander instructed him to hold back because there were civilians on the street. Instead, he took his gun and struck the young man in the head. This incident caused significant problems for the department. It was reported across all media outlets, and he faced persecution within the unit until he requested to leave. In his social life, he is unpleasant and awkward. I have no idea how he ended up in law enforcement, but he clearly lacked the mentality for the job. Story 44. He was a good kid who fell into a bad crowd and got involved with drugs. He discovered that his girlfriend used their income tax refund to bail another man out of jail. That man was later murdered, and he received a life sentence without parole. A few weeks later, she married someone else. Life goes on. Story 45. When I was 18, I volunteered for a teen mom program. We fed the homeless and brought them hats and blankets. A man came to us, praising our efforts, and fell to his knees, crying. The next day, he turned himself in for killing his pregnant girlfriend in the 1990s when they were teenagers. He said he saw our kindness and the help we were offering, which filled him with remorse. Story 46. I think it really depends on the situation and the person. I knew someone whose best friend was murdered, and he sought revenge. Eventually, he got caught and went to prison for 8 years. He wasn't a bad person. Intimidating, yes, but other than that, he was a pretty cool guy. Story 47. One of my good friends from high school killed his mother last year. If that weren't cruel enough, once he had beaten her so badly that she was choking, he refused to call for help because he told the police he wanted to listen to her suffocate for a while. She subsequently died. I would have never expected that from him. He was such a kind person in school. Sadly, after school he developed a methamphetamine habit and he was never the same. I still can't believe it. Story 48. I'm friends with a retired hitman. He found God. He told me a few stories of very bizarre situations he encountered when he had to do his job. He is a very chill guy. He once told me, I would rather die than go back to the life I had. Story 49. Back in high school, there were two brothers who were twins. I kissed one of them at a party while my friend dated the other. They didn't attend our school, which made them seem somewhat exotic to us. They were deer hunters, and there were always photos of them with blood smeared on their faces from the animals they had hunted. I often wondered if that experience desensitized them when it came to the human they killed. Story 50. I had a young friend in my first year at university. He was one of the top students in his high school and arrived at university with a scholarship, exemplifying the typical achiever. He was 17 when he started university, while I was around 24. He was a nice kid, really smart and funny, with a pretty impressive grade point average. However, he dropped out after becoming a father at 18. We tried to keep in touch, but eventually lost contact. A year later, I read in the newspaper that he was on the run in another country because he and a friend were involved in a violent incident over a girl. His picture was in the article and I was in shock, as was one of my closest friends. The friend he was with was caught. To this day, I don't know if he will be caught. I think it was about 12 years ago. Story 51. I have a relative who killed someone. I don't know when or where it happened. The only thing he said to me directly about it was either me or him. I know it was somewhere far away because this person traveled a lot in his youth. He is a normal person nowadays, but from time to time he says things like, I don't know, Billy, but I think I have a darkness in my heart. I feel like I'm a bad person who can't do good. He is the relative who has helped me the most in my entire life. Story 52. You may be curious about individuals who have committed murder, but I will focus on my cousin, a genuine war hero with the medals to prove it. He grew up in a divided family. His father was a police officer, which influenced his understanding of service. He is a good person, disciplined, thoughtful, and charismatic. He was injured during a jump in Ranger School, but, after recovering, re-enlisted for another tour. The convoy was ambushed, and he responded with gunfire and grenades, keeping his composure and leading his team to safety. Story 53. I knew a kid in primary school up to around age 11. We were friends, but I did not see him afterward. About 25 years later, I learned that he murdered a friend's aunt. He was a hyperactive kid, but I don't remember much more about him. Story 54. A relative of mine was killed while stationed overseas. He overcame his issues with post-traumatic stress disorder. Some cultures assist people in accepting the reality of those actions. He worked through his challenges related to that experience. Story 55. He was very creepy. I didn't find out until a couple of years later that he had killed his wife and dumped her body over 20 years ago. He had a whiny voice and small, beady eyes. His demeanor exhibited an exaggerated sense of innocence. Story 56. The kind of ignorance that leads someone to believe they have the right to harm another person for emotional pain is alarming. Angry individuals resemble poorly constructed firearms lacking safety mechanisms. Story 57. Spent 8 months in jail with a vehicular manslaughter cellmate. 2 others had held up a gas station at night and murdered the clerk. The cellmate was a little strange, but some people make poor choices and decisions. Story 58. I'm going to say allegedly for my mom's sake, but reportedly, my grandfather pushed a man out of a car while they were both drunk and caused his head to hit the pavement. My grandfather was charged with manslaughter based on witness testimony that he pushed him, although we can never know for sure. Story 59. My father was a Vietnam veteran. He never spoke of his experiences to me, but I overheard him telling my mother one night about a farmer he and his troop encountered. The man insisted he wasn't a Viet Cong spy. They couldn't take that chance, though, and my dad was the one ordered to kill him. It really affected him deeply. I know that wasn't the only person he killed or the worst thing he witnessed. He suffered from many health issues, and after he died, I found some of his writings where he expressed a desire to die and stated that this was all his karma for what he had to do in Vietnam. It made sense why he was often so grumpy. He didn't believe he deserved happiness or even life. He passed away in 2018, and my son shares his middle name. I miss you so much, Dad. I hope you finally found peace. Story 60. A person wanted to be a gangster and stabbed a kid at the bus stop when they were 14. This individual became a real-life gangster, frequently in and out of jail throughout their early 20s. They were a nice person but had no self-control, which was quite frightening. Story 61. One of my uncles killed his best friend when he discovered that the man had been abusing his wife. He warned his friend that if he ever caught even a hint of him laying an unkind hand on his wife again, he would shoot him right between the eyes. My uncle is a man of his word. He went to jail for it and got out on parole after about 10 years. Jail probably had more of an effect on him than the killing did. He feels regret for the situation that led to the shooting, but I don't think he has regrets about the shooting itself. Story 62. My dad was friends with Mark David Chapman and said he was great with kids. He wanted people to know that Mark was a real person and not a monster. Story 63. About a year ago, a coworker heard rustling in his driveway, so he grabbed his firearm and went to check it out. A random man was already in the driver's seat, trying to access the ignition when my coworker yelled at him. The situation was dire from the start because, while the man was armed, my coworker said he had no idea. Just seeing the man react was enough to make my coworker flinch and pull the trigger. I don't know a lot about guns, but apparently my coworker's firearm has a mechanism where the trigger doesn't reset fully after being pulled, so he ended up firing 2 shots at the man. The man probably would have survived if it had only been 1 shot. My coworker was in custody for a few weeks. When he came back to work, he honestly seemed like nothing had happened. Until we accidentally make a joke involving guns or robberies, we kind of just keep going along as usual. Even then, he is a very cool guy, so he doesn't get offended by it and usually has a joke to reply with. He is certainly not happy that he took a life, but day to day, it is like nothing ever happened. Story 64. My ex-boyfriend served 20 years in the military, deployed to the Middle East. He told me about some of his experiences and firefights. He would get that distant gaze when talking about such things. Ultimately, his mental health was the demise of our relationship. Story 65. He was the good-looking athlete in high school, popular in his crowd. He came from a religious family and was strict. He was grounded for every minute late past curfew. He was smart, had good grades, and was college-bound. He was always a bit self-righteous and pious, but never got into a physical fight in school. He intimidated kids who didn't stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and the national anthem in the late 1990s, and they listened. He married his high school sweetheart and had a child. They moved across the country, and she supposedly got into drugs, leaving to come back home with the child. His father died, and he apparently lost it. He started talking to another girl we had gone to school with who was a bit younger. She had a 5-year-old. A judge ordered the 5-year-old to go across the country to visit. The father told the judge he was afraid for his son's safety. This man beat the child and abused him to death within 5 days. He attempted to bury him in the mountains and marry his girlfriend at the courthouse so she wouldn't have to testify against him. He got caught when the father obviously never got his son back. I am so saddened for that little child and his father. I am angry at the judge and the mother for not protecting him. I feel sorry for the older brother, who is an active member of the church, and the mother of the murderer. His daughter has to live with this, but that little boy breaks my heart. I will never understand why he took it out on a child. He could have at least targeted his grown girlfriend instead. Story 66. A manager at a McDonald's I worked at killed his wife's lover. He was a nice and funny guy. I see him occasionally at Walmart. Story 67. From afar, they looked average. Up close, there was a strange coldness surrounding them. You could sense it. I would describe them as snails without their shells. Mysterious and somewhat charming, but not in a warm way. Their eyes definitely held a story. Even when they smiled, something felt off. Empty souls. Story 68. My cousin killed my sister's boyfriend. My sister and her boyfriend lived next door to my cousin. Her boyfriend was very paranoid, perhaps even hearing voices, but he was harmless, just really weird. He suspected my uncle and cousin of spying on them from the back porch. To address this, my sister and her boyfriend put up tarps to block their house from being seen from my cousin's house. They yelled at each other to keep their dogs from barking and were generally bad neighbors to one another. My sister claimed that my cousin and uncle were always instigating conflicts because she and her boyfriend lived with my grandmother, which my uncle did not like. Things escalated until one day it reached a breaking point. My uncle and cousin were putting up a camera on a pole pointing at my sister's backyard and porch for some reason. Her boyfriend was not happy about the camera and confronted them. An altercation occurred, leading my uncle to tackle my sister to the ground in the back room of the house, breaking the sliding glass door. During this time, her boyfriend and my cousin were in the backyard, where it was dark. No one witnessed what happened except my cousin and her boyfriend. While still on the ground, my sister saw her boyfriend come inside and go down the hallway, where he sat on the floor by the fridge and bled out. My cousin was unharmed and admitted guilt, claiming it was self-defense. No arrests were made. The autopsy revealed that her boyfriend was stabbed in the back multiple times. Story 69. My boss's son was involved in a driving incident. He wasn't speeding, and although I won't go into details, there was a lawsuit, and he was found to be completely not at fault. I didn't see him as much afterward, but he was a typical 17-year-old. Fun to work with. He seemed a little different afterward but returned to his normal self after some therapy. Story 70. Hey, veteran here. It's an indelible stain on your soul, as Saint Aquinas put it. I'm still trying to make peace with it. My relationship with God helps me sleep at night. Story 71. They were funny growing up, very popular and athletic. They got into drugs badly, and the last time I saw him, he had shaved off his eyebrows and didn't know who I was. I can't say I didn't see it coming, but I figured he'd take himself out before anyone else. He is in prison now. Story 72. I knew a guy in high school who struggled. We talked a lot and he seemed totally normal. He was funny and sometimes felt down like everyone else, but I had no idea he felt that way. Story 73. He admitted to killing someone for money. So you're a murderer, I said. He grimaced, knowing what he did was wrong. His father was a pastor. He was always kind and never treated me poorly. Integrity wasn't an issue. Taking a life for money is a serious matter, though. Story 74. I knew some troubled individuals who engaged in harmful activities. They were all struggling with addiction and deeply affected internally. One man told me that once he overcame the first challenge, the rest followed easily. Story 75. She was simultaneously the smartest and most neurotic person I have ever met. I worked for her for about 6 months while she was in prison for the crime. Story 76. They were quiet, but not shy. They always seemed a little different and had significant anger issues. Story 77. I never met them, but they were my grandfather's cousin and her boyfriend. They killed her father after years of abuse. My grandfather said she was really nice, but he didn't know her well. Story 78. He was a goofy, happy kid and one of the fellow nerds in the computer room at high school. Somehow, he became friends with two people from the next town over, a guy and a girl. They attempted a robbery and stabbed a man to death in his home. They are all still in jail and will be for life. Story 79. I had a coworker who was a former gang member in his youth. He didn't go into details for obvious reasons, except that he was part of a homicide squad. He had served time on several occasions and reached a point where he just wanted to live his life in peace. He was really cool and a great conversation partner. I went to school with a kid named Brent who didn't seem like a bad guy. He wasn't mean or a bully, but he was a bit off with dead eyes. He eventually broke into a woman's house and stabbed her over 20 times during a robbery. Story 80. It's embarrassing because I had a crush on him and he killed his mother. The plan was to get his father as well. He stopped being attractive after that and looked pretty undesirable. Story 81. I worked with the calmest, most soft-spoken man for years. He was older and once told me he had killed a security guard during an armed robbery and spent 18 years in prison. He claimed it was an accident. He was always super polite and kind. Story 82. I met the serial killer Sean Great at the Lone Pine Bar in Ashland, Ohio, when he was active before he was caught. He seemed like a normal person at the time, which freaks me out in retrospect. Story 83. A person from my school was like a cool older brother. He always had a joke and made everybody laugh. I was friends with his little sister, but I wasn't too close to her. He worked at the Boys and Girls Club and always had a funny story or a new game to play. We loved hanging out with him. I remember hearing he had a son and congratulating him on his son's birth. One day, I was scrolling through Facebook, and I saw that his son was missing. His son's grandmother was frantically looking for him, and it was posted on the community watch page. A few weeks later, they found the baby in the river. It was revealed that the father had taken him there. The father claimed it was an accident, but I looked into his eyes and knew he did that on purpose. There were 100 questions. Why was the child in the river without a life jacket? Why were there reports of the little boy screaming and crying, begging not to be hurt anymore? He said he left without telling anybody and just left the body there. I don't understand that either. If it really was an accident, why not call the police? I believe he did it and then lied about it to save himself. Because why else would he be smiling in his mugshot? I mostly blame Child Protective Services. There were numerous reports on this child. There were numerous reports on the father and his sisters when they were kids, and nothing was done. They said the baby would knock on people's doors and ask for food or whether he could come inside. They could have saved him. Story 84. Calm, quiet, collected, kind, and nice, yet a lonely person. It was the wildest thing when I found out. Story 85. A socially awkward person, but a nice and goofy individual, ended up breaking and entering after high school and killed a 50-year-old man. Story 86. A friend of mine shot another man in self-defense. He was tried in court and found not guilty by a jury of his peers of manslaughter. Matt was always a down-to-earth type of guy. He lived the biker life, but he was a true and good friend. If you crossed him, it wouldn't be good. Sadly, he passed away a few years after this incident. Story 87. He wasn't anything particularly special. If anything, he seemed regretful that he lived the life he did and did the things he had done. But he showed no sign of changing anytime soon. One day, I actually asked him why he doesn't quit all this and leave this life behind. I told him he must know he could end up killed one day if he doesn't. He told me, once you start digging that hole, after a while it gets too deep to get out of. And truthfully, I thought he was weak for thinking that at first, and for a long time actually. But I understand now. After a certain point, there is no walking away because it follows you everywhere you go. It doesn't matter if you move across the country, get a new job, or hang out with different people. After a while, you just are who you are. And after a while, it becomes incredibly hard to change, sometimes impossible when you are alone, which people in those situations often are. I was lucky to walk away when I did. Luckier than I could ever possibly know, and more than I want to admit. Story 88. Most police officers in my country have sent a few to Hades. I have police officer friends and one in my family, a cousin. They are just regular people. They don't talk much or brag about the shifts when they had armed exchanges with criminals. Story 89. Mouse a little creep. Before he ran his best friend down with a vehicle, he was all right. But after that, he just looked inhuman, with soulless eyes, no joy, just evil. Oh, and his parents helped him cover it up. He was never convicted. It's pretty wild, but we all know what he did. Story 90. I used to go to the pub with my uncle when I was back in town and meet his friends. There was a lovely guy with an art history degree I chatted with all the time about a particular style of art we liked. He would tell me all about the artist's history and even brought me a couple of books on them once. He seemed like the nicest guy. Honestly, I still think the version of him I met in his 50s was a nice guy. From our conversations, I knew he had spent time in prison and still had an ankle monitor. My uncle once let slip that the reason he was in prison was for manslaughter. When he was in his teens or early 20s, he punched a guy in a fight outside a pub, and the guy hit his head on the curb and died. I discovered years later that the circumstances of his incarceration were probably more complicated. He had been in prison for 20 years, unsure what the original sentence was, but that is longer than a manslaughter charge in my country, I believe. His ankle monitor also prevented him from going within a 50-mile radius of where the event occurred, which again seems odd for a manslaughter charge. Then I heard he had actually known the guy and had previous altercations with him, with suspicions from his closer friend group that it was not an accident. I later learned that the reason he could not go within 50 miles was because of alleged threats against the victim's family. Suddenly, what originally sounded like a tragic event leading to a boy's death and another boy's life ruined in prison started to sound a lot darker. The only thing I know for sure is that he was involved in a man's death. And that over 30 years later, he still seemed like a nice guy, as far as I could tell from an hour-long chat about art every 4 months. Story 91. I used to work in corrections, so I have met many people convicted of murder and still talk to at least one person a week who has been charged or convicted of murder in my current job. In my experience, what they are like largely depends on the circumstances that led to the other person's death. Those who have murdered family members tend to be cold, calculating individuals. Most people I have met in this case have no remorse, and if they feel any regret, it is primarily because they got caught and not because of their actions. Speaking with these individuals can be unsettling. Some of them seem very hollow or overly charming. Those who murdered their mistresses or whose murder charges stemmed from a crime of passion can be very intense, emotional people. Many of them tend to show some remorse, but again, they are usually more upset about the loss of their freedom than about the loss of the other person's life. Most require significant work on their emotional intelligence. I have met a few who put in the effort while they were in prison and became quite compassionate people after decades inside. This was the group I preferred to work with, as some of them wanted to become better people and were happy to put in the work. Those convicted of manslaughter or whose actions resulted in the unintentional death of another person tend to be more reserved and remorseful. Sometimes you could even tell they were grieving for the victim and not just for themselves. In my experience, they tend to be more introspective and aware that their actions ended someone else's life. Many struggle with their mental health afterward. This group can be challenging to work with, as addictions are usually also a factor which presents its own set of challenges. Lastly, I would like to mention the man who killed a Nazi. He was proud of it and would tell anyone who would listen that he did it, including the name of the victim. Working with him was difficult because, while Nazis are bad people, killing is also wrong. He struggled to understand that concept. He could be quite scary and unpleasant a majority of the time. That said, many of them acted like normal people most of the time, and you wouldn't know they had killed someone unless you were told. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.